Good morning and welcome to another episode, Cup of Coffee with Bill. I'm pleased to introduce my guest for today, Martin Graham, Manager of Business Development with Ohio State Sports Properties, to continue just exploring sales in this new environment in the industry and find out how he's been doing at Ohio State and what he's learned out of this pandemic. So, Martin, welcome to the show and thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you, Bill.
So just for people that don't know you, aren't familiar with what you do in the industry, can you just give us a quick 30-second elevator pitch on yourself and what you do with Ohio State?
Yeah, so manager of business development, Ohio State Sports Properties, a Learfield IMG college property. So I work specifically with our Ohio State property, manage a number of current partners and those ongoing partnerships, and also responsible for developing new business and going and finding new partners each year.
All right, awesome. So part of why I wanted you on is you've got an interesting place within a larger company in the landscape, but also at a very prominent property, and ultimately I think one that we saw through the football team really help dictate the course of some of the events throughout the year. And so as a seller, you were really witness to some different things that I'm sure impacted negatively and positively your business this year. So let's just start in broad strokes. What changed when you're looking at we're not playing football in the fall to suddenly an on-field, a player-led protest essentially gets you football back, which I'd say is the best thing that could have happened. What changed in a 50,000 foot view from your perspective in the office?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, everything changed. Really thankful for Coach Day and the leadership of him and all the other players and their parents that were so actively for having some sort of season and giving them a chance to play. Because as you said, we were at a point where we had basically come to terms with there's not going to be a football season, and what that means for our partners and their partnerships with us, how we manage that moving forward. And we are starting to have those conversations, put together alternative plans for ways that our partnership could still get through this year with many of our partners, and planning around that. And then obviously the progress was made and there was an announcement that we are going to have a season, and it's going to be conference only with no fans at any of the conference games. And so that was a whole nother pivot where we were like, okay, well, we were addressing how are we going to get through this with no games at all. Now we're at a point where how are we going to get through this with a limited number of home games with 0 fans. And I think the kickoff was something like 5 weeks after the announcement came. So it was like, we got to figure it out pretty much now. Not only figure out the plan, but then share that plan with partners and try to get them on board with our suggestions for how we navigate it together. So everything changed. I mean, we're just like a lot of the people that probably listen to this podcast, we were selling sports sponsorships at a time when we didn't think there were going to be any sports. So it was a wild time. And again, we're fortunate that things turned around and we had some semblance of a season to try to get through the year. But I think the biggest change was the need to figure out how to tell the story that we can connect our partners with our fan base, even outside of game day. And game day, is one of the more traditional, well, it is the most traditional way for sponsors to reach fans and the main revenue generator in sponsorships traditionally. And, being in an environment where we knew we weren't going to have fans, and at one point thinking we weren't going to have any games at all, we had to try to figure out, okay, how can we tell a story that there's still value in associating with athletics, even outside of game day? And I think it's quite similar to a lot of the industry trends that we read about that have emerged from COVID. It's like sports teams were already going that direction before COVID and trying to find ways to connect with their fan base outside of just the limited season and trying to do that 365. And I think COVID caused us to expedite that evolution. And I think that's really the process that led us to where we are today, having gone through everything we went through. It'll be interesting to see how many of those new ideas stick for the long term, and what falls by the wayside. But I think you'll see a lot more retained through future years, that sort of concepts and platforms that were born because of COVID. And you'll see a lot more of that moving forward.
So you talk about the pivot, and you're like a basketball player turning left and right, in this short time span where it's yes, no, yes, okay, we're playing. What were some of the things that you were going out to your partners to say? We'll go. Let's look at first when you were going out to them and be like, look, we're not playing football this year. What are you saying, and how did the department at Ohio State, and then I guess the company as a whole, approach going out to them to try to retain as much of that revenue as possible, assuming most of it was going straight to digital, but also maybe were there opportunities with the larger student body as it stood, knowing that there were still going to be some people on campus, although a lot were going to be at a distance and work or learning from home? What were those conversations like for the first round of those discussions when we weren't thinking that we were playing football?
Yeah, most of it shifted towards digital, because even when you look at, like, we still had students on campus. There were maybe some creative ways that we could activate, but everybody else was also trying to pivot. So, like, student life was just trying to figure out how the heck are we going to have a calendar, an academic year with students on campus, and all the new processes and things that were going into place. Like, there's no way we could have figured out some coordinated effort to put on a special activation with the student body, because student life had their hands full just like everybody else did. So most of our efforts went the digital route. And so, like, a few specific things, like, and credit to our activation team, really started putting together these ideas back in like March of last year, knowing that it's kind of unknown where the season will end up, but there may be some sort of impairment. So let's come up with ideas and concepts now. So we were way out ahead of the curve with at least having these ideas built out. We hadn't shared them externally yet, obviously, because we didn't want to float to partners that, hey, we're considering the chance that there might not be a football season. No one wants to put that thought out there until it's reality. So we had already baked some of these ideas internally. Like, one of the coolest ones was a coach's podcast. So every head coach at each of our programs at Ohio State, we had an episode with each of them that just talks about their program, who they are. And I think what was interesting about that is they wouldn't really have the opportunity to have the limelight with, like, the rowing team or the diving team that kind of fly under the radar because of the huge sports like football and basketball that garner most of the attention. But we were able to put together a podcast that each episode featured a different head coach within Ohio State athletics. And our partners really loved it because they're given love and attention to, again, some of these sports that don't typically get the limelight, but are, still some of the best within their fields. And so that was a really cool new platform that ended up working out really well for us as far as getting partners on board. And we had a title sponsor, and then we had episode presenting sponsors as well. And it was easy for us to do. And we knew that we could do that no matter what happened with the outcome of the football season, whether we had games or whether we didn't have games. And then another big piece for us was our company's efforts with this platform called Fan 365, which is essentially co-branded, targeted ad campaigns that leverage our first-party fan database that we've started to collect at each one of our properties. And so, kind of a differentiator to say, hey, this is a way that you can reach our fans. There are fans that you want to reach. They're not all gathering in the hundreds of thousands this fall, but you can still reach them by the millions on the web as they search the web every day. And so we have the database, and we also had the team behind it to coordinate the campaign, launch the campaign, share the metrics with the post-campaign reports and things like that. So there's a couple of things of the probably dozens of different ideas and concepts that we launched just because of COVID, and knowing that we wouldn't have any fans, and at times thinking that we might not have any games either.
The podcast one has always seemed like a no-brainer to me for especially bigger programs, because it's no different than a coach coming on for a 15-minute interview with the school's radio show. And I don't read or see a lot of other properties doing that. So, kudos to your team for coming up with that idea, because I think it also, especially in college athletics now, where you can find more exposure for other sports beyond the big revenue drivers, it's important. But can we look at how did sponsors respond? So you lay out all of these different ideas to try to still salvage something for them around athletics, and then suddenly football's back on. Were there any issues once you got sponsors settled in on this reality that they're not going to be associated with football? Were there any issues getting them back on track with what they would normally get at a football game? Assuming that they didn't have anything that was tied to fans in venue, or were all of them pretty much like, football's back, great, let's go back to plan A?
It was pretty much all over the board. I'll say that the main trend was that we had a very high level of trust with almost all of our partners, and we're able to navigate what's the best fit for that partner. It was all dependent upon what assets they had, like how impacted are they by there being no fans in the stands? Are they impacted at all? Do they have a perception that it's impacted more than it truly is? Is their business heavily impacted and they're not in a position to, activate on their sponsorship, even if we did have full capacity, because of, how COVID has had an impact on other businesses, not just the sports industry. So it was kind of all over the board. But I think that the most important piece was the high level of trust we had with our partners. And I think that dates back years. Like, I manage a current book of partners, but we have a number of partners that have been with us since before my time, before a lot of our staff's time. And so, previous people at our property have done a good job just maintaining a high level of trust. And our company had a company-wide policy that was very firm about being partners first, because we know that after we get through this wild year, we're probably going to have a more normal year for the foreseeable future. So we need to make sure that we treat this year as an outlier and don't lose relationships because of all the pressures that may be on us in the short term. And so, and these are the conversations that we're having with each of our partners. And so I think that us being upfront about our outlook on the year, and us having a history of trust with our partners, and them knowing that we truly are putting them first, made them a lot more open to the alternative ideas we came up with. Because even I'd say 70 to 80% of our partnerships were significantly impacted by the fact that there weren't any fans at football games or at basketball games. So there weren't many conversations where it was like, okay, football's back, so we're ready to go with the plan that we had in place. Like almost all of them were impacted and need to be changed in some way. So it was a lot of tough conversations, touching base every, say, 24 to 48 hours with every single one of our partners, just to figure out, hey, what are your goals for this year? So we can build a plan, an alternative plan for this year, knowing what assets we will have access to. And we'll put together a custom plan for you. So there's a lot of legwork on our side, but I think our partners appreciated that we didn't just come to them with a couple skeletons or templates of, hey, here's the plan, take it or leave it. It was much more of a fluid conversation around how can we kind of navigate this together, because they know we're in a tough spot. We know they're in a tough spot too, but there is a way to go about it and finding a valuable proposition for them and getting through the year as partners.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's been one of the more interesting things. I think if somebody was in the industry and they didn't understand this concept of sponsorships needing to truly be built around being partners, they weren't going to last long after COVID settled, because when deals get burned, people and companies have long memories about issues like that, and have a bad year this year regardless if you didn't do justice by an account. It burns you for years down the road. So it's been interesting to hear people talk about how deep these relationships have been forged over time, and even if they're relatively new partnerships, the trust that everyone found in each other to try to build something out of it. Um, let's look at general selling. What are some things that you took away about having to shift from not being able to go out to meetings in person, not being able to go about the process the way you would normally go about it? What are some things that you picked up throughout the time working remotely? And are you still remote? Are you back in the office and able to take face to face, or?
So we're still remote, but we're able to go out and meet people in person at this point. So, but I will say a lot of my meetings still tend to be virtual.
Okay. So what are you still practicing now, but what have you picked up along the way that you found effective, and what are some things that you're going to carry with you once things go back to normal that you picked up during COVID that have really worked for you and have made you sharper in the field?
I've discovered how to unmute myself on about 5 different video conference platforms. So I'm a
That's a
broad
big
expert.
one.
I've added to my resume of programs I'm proficient in. No, I think one of the bigger things with this that I took away just from a salesperson perspective is selling new ideas that didn't previously exist, and being able to kind of paint the picture for what it could look like if we did it. Because as we talked about, a lot of these conversations around COVID alternative benefits were new ideas, that like the coaches podcast that we had never done before. And I think it just takes a whole new level of confidence to get on a video chat with a sponsor that knows that you're in a tough spot as a property, because you're trying to figure out, how you can keep as much revenue as possible on the books while
Right.
still providing, adequate value, of course. But being able to have the confidence to step into that conversation, all your cards are on the table. They know you're in a tough spot. But being able to sell a new idea that you feel, and you need to convince them to feel the same way, that there is true marketing value, even though it's much different than what their partnership had originally planned to look like. So I think selling new ideas and painting a picture of, again, what things could look like if we were to put together a new plan or a new concept customized for somebody, that's just something that we don't do quite as much in sponsorships, because we have so many assets that have already been established. But definitely a solid takeaway from the experience. And then I think the second thing, which hopefully most people listening could relate, is just being candid with people. I don't know if it's more a function of just people's perspectives being different because of all the crazy things that went on in the world in 2020, and it kind of puts sports business into perspective. Like, we don't work in a life or death business. Like, it's obviously our jobs are really important for our own security. Like, I need to sell new business, and I need to retain my clients, and my clients need to deliver on the marketing objectives that they've been given by their bosses and such. So it's important, but it's not life or death. And so I think at least what that's led to for me, and I think a lot of my conversation with partners, is just a lot more candor, less sugarcoating, putting your cards on the table. And I think the environment sort of forced that out of people. It could be because we all wear polos or button downs up above the waist, and at the same time, we've got sweatpants or basketball shorts on below screen, and we're just all a lot more comfortable. But I think that helps have more constructive conversations with current partners, and especially with prospective partners, where I think you can just develop a different level of trust by being more candid, being much more open about situations or ideas, concepts, etc. So those are a couple of the things that I took away.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's been something that I've heard from several other people. Other people have brought up on other episodes of the show that it's really removed and I don't want to make it seem like a bad thing, but it's removed the need in some ways to put on a show when we're having these meetings, because we always want to come in and we want to be hot. We want to make sure that we're the big voice in the room while we're trying to secure these big contracts. But at the end of the day, like you said, they know when you're making a call, they know that you're coming to them with an idea that hopefully gets money out of them to you. Um, I think it, like you said, it just brings a lot more understanding to the table, and it lets us get down to actually having those deep conversations that people are going to understand versus the need to try to paint parts of the picture that we don't need to paint. People know that piece is there. Let's just talk about the middle part of the picture that's really what we want to talk about, and how should that look. It's very, very fascinating.
I haven't had to be as careful on how I phrase things or position things.
Mhm.
It's like you don't need to waste your time, like you said, like dressing things in a certain way. You can just be straightforward. Like they know why we're talking. Our prospects know why we're talking. They know the type of year that we're coming out of. And so again, all of our cards are on the table. Let's talk about if there's enough value for you as a brand to put this partnership together.
Going back a little bit to an early part of this piece of the conversation, you were talking about the ability to create a little bit more, and that's something that I've looked a lot into, because I've always, in some ways, more from the agency perspective, perhaps. Um, this was really a good year for people to try to push the envelope with partners and clients to say, hey, this is something we haven't approached you with before. This might make you a little bit uncomfortable in terms of it's not going to hit the KPIs the way they normally work, but I think it's going to produce results for you. Here's what I have in mind. Please consider it. Did you find yourself able to develop things more than you have in the past? I know you said some stuff came to light, but did you find yourself personally able to bring a little bit more creativity to the table and pitch some things that might not normally have made sense to some companies, but now, because there aren't people in the stadium that you can put them in front of, they have to accept that my touches are coming digitally. Did you find any of that at all?
Yeah, definitely. And again, a lot of the build out credit goes to our service team, and they armed us kind of with the things that we needed to go to the market with. But yeah, I mean, I think that the way that we had to position it on the front line as we're actually pitching it, it takes a lot more work in trying to position it in a way that, although it's a new concept, you can somehow apply principles that they're used to and try to relate that to this new concept. So there's some sort of concreteness to what you're pitching, and it's not totally new and totally obscure to what they're used to. And to your point, establishing what the new KPIs are with this compared to what they're used to. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, there's been some great ideas that have come out of the pandemic. I hope people keep pressing it, because we're really at a time where we can flex our creative juices. And I mean, why not? Nobody really knows what's coming next, so why don't we keep pushing the line forward and see what comes out of it? And I think a lot of people are, and I want to see that continue. Um, so shift gears a little bit. I want to talk. I know you are. We talked before we started recording. Know you're keeping your eye on NFTs. Um, what do you think the sponsorship capabilities are going to be down the road as we get deeper and deeper into it? I'm still admittedly not sure the staying power of that part of the industry as a whole. I think um, we've talked before that you're going to see two or three of the bigger names stand over time, but the rest of these smaller ones that come up just aren't going to be around. I think trading cards, that's a natural next evolution for that industry. But I think in general, you're only going to see somebody like Top Shot, Tom Brady's NFT group be around, but some of these smaller ones aren't going to stand. What are your thoughts on the sponsorship side of it and how that might impact down the road, whether it's in college or just the landscape in general.
Yeah, I think you're right about the bigger platforms or the bigger players are going to be the ones that actually stick, and some of the smallers are probably benefiting from the fad moment that's happening right now with it. I think they'll be long term about as relevant as whatever content they're tied to. But from a sponsorship perspective, like there's much, as I told you, there's much smarter people you could talk to about NFTs than me. I think the biggest question for our industry in sports is how can we leverage NFTs to engage with the audience that our industry is really struggling and trying to find new ways to engage with. There's the generation or the demographic that's most interested in NFTs happen to be that demographic that is fleeting for sports, that they don't go to as many games, they don't watch games on TV, they don't watch the RSN to watch their baseball game or their baseball team or their NBA team play every night. They're watching highlights on Twitter and things like that. And our industry has continually tried to re-engage with that demographic, and it happens to be the demographic that's most interested and engaged with NFTs. So can we leverage NFTs to, again, engage with that demographic and bring them back into having a closer relationship with their sports team like we've been able to with other generations? So I think it may be a sort of a bridge to that demographic. But from a sponsorship lens, I'm a pretty simple thinker. Like, I don't like to complicate things. I think when you look at it through a sponsorship lens, there's some really simple applications for NFTs, and that can be activated really easily. And I think, one of the more classic sponsorship activations is a game day gift giveaway, right? So like a bobblehead giveaway, the first 5,000 people get a bobblehead. I think that with something like an NFT, especially with where mobile tickets are headed, the first 5,000 people to scan their mobile ticket at the game that day get the limited edition NFT. I think something like that could, again, hit that goal of bringing in a fold of new or distant fans that wouldn't normally come to a game that day. But the appeal of an NFT, which they're really interested elsewhere, may draw them in and force them to come to more games than they normally would. And so I think things like that, I think, similar principles, but we do a lot of enter to wins or register to wins with our partners, where there's like a, win 2 tickets to a Buckeyes game or win this Buckeye prize pack. Like, I think just applying an NFT as the takeaway piece of that for fans, of saying, hey, sign up for your chance to win this NFT, or everybody that signs up, or the first 5,000 people to sign up win this NFT. And then it creates this lead database for partners to follow up and remarket to for their core products and services. So I think things like that. They're like Ohio Stadium's coming up on our 100th year anniversary next year. So I would imagine that there's a great opportunity there to commemorate that moment. And I've also heard a lot of conversations around how somehow including NFTs in the season ticket ownership benefits could also lead to, again, drawing in some of those fans that maybe they're only partial plans or only buy on the secondary market. But if you include, if you apply or integrate NFTs into that relationship or that value proposition in some way, it pulls people from a new audience or a new population that wouldn't normally be interested in season tickets, because it just is not how they're used to consuming your sport, right? So,
right.
But again, I think it all ties back to the main idea of how can you leverage it to tap into that demographic and integrating it into the fan experience in a way that capitalizes on that.
I'm sure as we speak, Mark Cuban and the Mavs are actively developing the NFT season ticket holder giveaway concept that you discussed. So don't be surprised if we read about that next week.
It's probably going to launch tomorrow.
You heard it here first, folks. So just so we can get to know you a little bit better before we end the show, what are you reading right now, Martin?
I'm actually reading A Promised Land, Barack Obama's autobiography, and I'm not big into politics, and neither is the book, which I appreciate about it. It's more about his personal journey. Super interesting background. You would have never thought, and he would have never thought that from where he came from and his upbringing that he could be the president of the United States. And I just think there's a lot of great takeaways from his personal story that could help anyone in their careers and how they look at their careers.
It's on the reading list as we speak. That's the one thing that's come out of the pandemic is definitely been reading a little bit more than I have in the past.
Right.
Um, who are you following right now? And it can be an influencer, a thought leader, anybody that when they release something, share something online, you're consuming it as soon as possible.
I got to say, first one that comes to mind is my guy David Millay. I got to know him while we were both at Disney Institute, and he spun off and started his own consultancy. They basically help athletic departments with all things associated with fans, fan engagement, fan experience, and everything in between. And he has a podcast called Flip the Switch, where he brings people in from all different areas of sports and entertainment and also outside of sports and entertainment. The main goal is to learn and apply practices from other industries to the sports and entertainment world. And I agree with him that that's one of the best ways to innovate within our industry is just taking things that are working elsewhere and applying it in a new way to our business. And so I always get a lot of really cool takeaways from each one of his episodes. And he actually had, so Mark Cuban, it's interesting you brought him up. I forget the woman's name, but he had a guest on his podcast last month where she runs this Mark Cuban experience, it's called, this group that he employs to basically just disrupt the industry and come up with different innovative ways to create content, distribute content, new business models. It's a weird, like, blank slate company. Mm-hmm. But it's just fascinating the type of things that they're exploring and that they're doing. That's why that when I made the joke about they're probably launching some sort of NFT season ticket holder benefit tomorrow, like they probably are pretty far along and just waiting when to pull the trigger.
I've heard him talk, and it was mainly more on the cryptocurrency side on other podcasts about where he's looking at, because I think they were the first in the league to accept Dogecoin as payment in the stadium. So it wouldn't be surprised. And I also think now you might be the seventh or eighth guest on my show that's mentioned Cuban as somebody they're keeping their eye on in some way. So I think I have to try to get him on here now. So we'll see how that goes.
I'll put in a word for you if you'd like.
Appreciate it. Let's do that. And then last question, and we'll get you on your way. What do you have your eye on over the next 3 months? In or out of the industry, it doesn't matter.
It's in, and it's not a surprise, and it's probably what's on the mind of most people you talk to these days is NIL, mm-hmm. And just how it's going to take shape at the federal level and at the state level, and how that's going to trickle down to the school level, especially working for Learfield IMG College on the sponsorship side. Of course, it's going to disrupt our industry in a number of ways, and I think it's a good thing. It's just a matter of how we can figure out to be ahead of what disruptions it's going to cause and how we can be a part of those disruptions. But it's definitely a topic that is going to be a big part of all of our partnerships moving forward, whether they invest in NIL or whether they don't. It's going to be a conversation that we're likely going to have on a daily basis in the next 3 to 6 months.
I wish we would have seen a little bit more leadership prior to the Alston case and even after from the NCAA as far as their full stance on it, because it ultimately, I think, makes everybody in the industry's life a little bit easier while we're trying to come up with a framework to manage deals, what's going on in the marketplace, how are we valuing different aspects of these deals at all levels. But It's fascinating. I think it's far past due that this has come about for the athletes. And, I think at the end of the day, it gives you a little bit more work to do, but I think it really does present a great opportunity to be able to maybe utilize some people, theoretically right now. I don't want to get you in trouble, but use some athletes in different ways that you might not have been able to in the past. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Well, Martin, this has been great. Another awesome discussion, just digging into how sellers have managed through the pandemic. Congrats on getting through it and giving us some great takeaways. So thank you again for joining. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Martin.